Hey everyone, so this is my top 10 fantasy series as of the beginning of 2024. I'll give you a spoiler and let you know that most of these are quite old series. I haven't read a heck of a lot of more modern fantasy, although I have a lot of it on my TBR, and it will be interesting to see what gets bumped off as maybe those things become my new favourites. First off, some honourable mentions. The Wheel of Time. Now, this is a series that I am reading right now. I've only read 3 books, so I don't feel I can really put this on the list, although I can definitely see that probably when I finish this, it will go on the top 10 list, and I'll have to bump something off to make room for it. Next up, the Drenai Saga by David Gemmell. Now, I have read Legend, and I absolutely loved it, but I haven't read any others of the Drenai Saga. I've read a couple of other David Gemmells, which I also enjoyed, so I don't feel I can put this on the list yet, but I intend to read this again this year and continue reading the rest of the series. And that will probably enter the top 10 list at some point. Next up is The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. I have read the first 3 books. I don't have particularly fond memories of them. I enjoyed them, and I'd like to continue reading the series, and I'm going to be reading the first book in the Live Ship Traders this year. So it may be entering my top 10 list at some point, but as of now, not quite. Okay, number 10 is the Mistborn Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I've read the first trilogy. I've read Elantris. I haven't read any more of his. So, no, I can give you a spoiler now. The Stormlight Archive is not going to be on this list because I haven't read any of it yet, but I do intend to. But for now, this series, definitely top 10. It was inventive, has an interesting magic system, the characters are all quite fun to follow, there's a lot of neat twists, the world is creative, it's epic in scope. I mean, what more could you want? Number 9, and I don't think I've ever seen this on anyone's top 10 list, it is the Fighting Fantasy series by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. This is a series of game books that came out in the 1980s, like Choose Your Own Adventure, but you have a character with a stat sheet and you roll dice to fight monsters, and it's a bit more structured than Choose Your Own Adventure. Most of the books are quite distinctive because they've got these green spines. If you ever find one of these in a second-hand bookshop, you should probably snap it up because they're worth quite a bit of money. The books up in the 50s go for hundreds of dollars on eBay. A lot of them are all kind of set in the same fantasy world, although there are a few, like there's some sci-fi ones and some really strange ones in there. But anyway, there's 59 in total. I just enjoy the whole fantasy aspect of it. And I also enjoy the mechanics. I love any sort of thing that plays with a medium. So for example, I love books that actually, where the characters actually know that they're in a book and play with that aspect of the fact that you're reading a book. And for these, I like how over the course of the series, the authors or the game designers come up with different ways of using the game book medium to inject kind of new ways of reading and having new rules system that work within the confines of a game book. Anyway, if you ever get the chance to pick one up, I highly recommend it. They're usually pretty thin, so have a bit of fun with them. Number 8, Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. I just love how inventive the Harry Potter series is. There's all sorts of very creative detail in these books, and there's a lot of humour that doesn't come across much in the movies. So if you've only ever watched the movies, I highly recommend reading the actual books because there's just so much in them that is not in the movies at all. Number 7 is The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Now this has a special place in my heart. These are some of the first fantasy books I ever read. My favourite, which I think is the favourite of most people, is The Magician's Nephew. There's just so much interesting stuff in these books. There's a few little funny bits in them when you read them nowadays, but I think they're still totally enjoyable. Number 6, the Shannara series by Terry Brooks. Now, yes, this first book is a complete copy of Lord of the Rings. It's unbelievable how many similarities there are from this book to Lord of the Rings. But back in the early 80s, in fact, in 1977, when this came out, there really wasn't that much like this around. So this is a bit of a nostalgia pick for me because I read Lord of the Rings when I was in 6th grade, and then when I was in year 7, I read this. And the Lord of the Rings prose can be a little bit difficult for someone of that age, whereas this is a bit more readable. It just had everything that I enjoyed about that whole fantasy world. And then obviously he went on to write the sequels. The second book is very different, very enjoyable, and that's actually what they made the TV show of, which was not that great. But anyway, the second book really is very different, and the subsequent books were all really enjoyable. It's hard to underestimate how big this was back in the day, and it will always have a special place in my heart. Okay, number 5, and I'm going to cheat a little here so that I can squeeze another series onto my top 10. So I'm combining 2 series here. The first is the Dragonlance Chronicles by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. These are fantastic books. I played the D&D modules that these are kind of based off, and just the world and their writing. Their writing is that kind of writing where they do great world building. They'll just mention things and it's like, oh, I want to know about that. They just kind of slip things in. This was a fantastic series. And along with that, I'm going to do Drizzt, the Drizzt series by A Salvatore. I've read, I don't know how many of these, maybe 10 or so. They're all enjoyable. I haven't read all of them, but these are just, you know, A Salvatore can do fighting scenes so well. The description of Menzo Berezin is just really cool. How does a society where their lawful evil work, and how do you break away from a society like that? These are old school books and still way enjoyable, and he's still writing them. Okay, we're down to number 4, and again, it is a bit of a nostalgia pick for me. It is The Belgariad by David Eddings. And this series came out in the 80s and it was huge. And if you love maps, there are maps like nothing else in this series. Every book is split up into 2 or 3 sections, and each section is another place on the map. So it is a bit of a kind of travelogue of them going around this entire map. So I absolutely love that kind of exploration type fantasy. They're also very funny characters. There's a lot of humor in these books. The sequel series, it did become a bit repetitive, but then there were 2 extra books called Belgariad and Polgara, and they were fantastic. I really enjoyed them. He went on to write other stuff. I find it all enjoyable, but nothing will quite replace the place that this has in my memories. I haven't read it in quite a while. Knowing me, I think I would still enjoy this. There are people that like read this once a year, have read it like a zillion times and still enjoy it. It's kind of like just popcorn. They're just so cozy and comfort reads, basically. So that's why this gets number 4 on my top 10 list. We're down to number 3, and number 3 is the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. Again, another series started in the 80s. I haven't read all of them. I think I've got maybe 7 to go. I haven't read one in quite a while, but these are just so funny. There are literally laugh out loud moments. There are books that I read where there's a bit of humor and, you know, it's funny, but some of the humor in these are literally like, if I'm on a train, I may actually laugh out loud. I find that's not the case so much with the later ones necessarily, but some of the early ones are just brilliant. If you haven't read these, I'll give the suggestion that most people do, which is start with Guards, which is book number 8, because the first few books are good, but they are a little bit patchy in terms of having any sort of plot. But definitely a fantastic series. So that brings us down to number 2, and that is The Riftwar Cycle by Raymond E. Feist. The first book, Magician, absolutely brilliant. I've enjoyed all the books that I've read. I haven't actually read all that many, and I'm about to start the Serpent War saga. So that I'm really looking forward to, because some people say that that's kind of the pinnacle of the whole cycle. Again, this is another 80s book, but if you're someone that loves fantasy, you should do yourself a favor and read this before reading anything else. And you only have to read the first book. It is a standalone. I would highly recommend, after the first 3 books, there's a series called the Empire Trilogy, written in collaboration with Yanni Wurtz. and they are excellent. So I would highly recommend reading at least those first 6. And coming in at number 1, it's probably no surprise to people that have seen some of my other videos, but it is The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. Again, this was my kind of not quite entry into fantasy because I read Narnia before this, but there's just so much in these books, and I'm currently reading through the history of Middle-earth. I'm going to be reading book 4 fairly soon. There is just so much that he invented and just made up. It's just incredible. I don't think I'll ever get bored of this series. It would take something absolutely extraordinary for this to be bumped down from my number 1 spot, so I don't think that will ever happen. And as someone who loves maps, just look at that. And this one as well. So that's my top 10 list. Let me know in the comments whether any of these are on your top 10 favourite lists. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. See ya.